Have you ever watched or read material detailing the end of the world? The utter chaos and terror of everything we've come to know completely collapsing, life becoming a waking nightmare only escapable in death. You've probably encountered this most with the zombie genre specifically, but it can apply to almost any type of apocalypse, even nuclear. Yet Fallout has shown very little of this so far. In fact, every Fallout game that we play, in each iteration of the wasteland we explore, it's in the decades after a nuclear apocalypse. We don't really see how a bustling metropolis can turn into a cold, empty graveyard. Starting with Fallout 1, we see the world at around 80 years after the apocalypse. Then every game after takes place over 100 or even 200 years after the end of the world. Only recently with Fallout 76 have we even got to experience the wasteland anywhere close to the end of the world at 25 years after the Great War. Although 76 fails to make complete use of its time period, and many if not most Fallout fans have not played it. Even at the earliest point, that being 76, by the time we step foot in the wasteland, everything has basically sunk into a state of permanence. We have the big raider gangs, the built up settlements, the Brotherhood of Steel, the creatures that we've seen all over the US. This problem definitely applies more to the East Coast, because I guess everyone there is just too lazy to get off their asses and improve anything. So what I would think would be awesome to see, and would really bring a fresh new take on the Fallout IP, is a Fallout Final Days. A game set in the final days of the war between America and China that resulted in the end of the world. Then subsequently the immediate aftermath of the nuclear war, where you watch your world collapse as everything turns to shit, everyone turns against you, and everything inside you dies. Pure and utter chaos. This is something that's really lacking in Fallout these days. I discussed this in my Desolation video, how the unending nightmarescape that was Fallout 1's world has turned into the colourful, hyper-stylized, I hesitate to even say apocalypse, of modern Fallout. This setting would give us the best of both worlds, the stylized pre-war life, and as time passes, the gradient slowly shifts to the unforgiving hellscape of the first game, except turned up to 11. Rather than us seeing a dead world decades after the apocalypse, we would see it dying, violently thrashing around as it burns. I think the best way to show this, and I'll get to the other options later, would be a linear story with basic A and B choices to be made, with the story following a soldier deployed in Washington DC to maintain order. I think a good start would be in China, while the main character is on deployment. It would serve to show the war from a first-hand perspective and give a good introduction to allow a slower pace for the next phase of the story. Said phase being the main character returning home, and after a short time of peace and quiet in pre-war America, the nukes strike the country. The player character would then immediately be mobilized to maintain order in the chaos, in the Fallout. But this would be a completely different kind of Fallout. As mentioned before, no massive groups and no familiar mutations. There would also be no rebuilding, no farming, no moving forward, just reliance on the old world for scavenging. It would start out like a regular disaster, civilians flocking to relief sites and the military trying to clean up what they can, with minor looting and any other crime that would occupy you. The situation, however, would very quickly deteriorate. As people come to realize the supply of everything from food to medicine has stopped, the floodgates would open. Fights would start over food, water, and every other quickly dwindling resource. Given the type of nukes used to decimate the country, few people would have died in the blast. Rather, most people would slowly wither away from radiation poisoning, only adding fuel to the fire as more and more people turn against you. People that turn to violence and theft to survive, becoming roving bandits preying upon anyone they can. And when they're not hunting civilians or fighting other bandits, they're targeting the military for the precious few resources left. At this point, being one of the most experienced soldiers remaining, it falls to you to deal with the hardest of tasks. As the military safe zones and bases continually exhaust resources and lose men to radiation, desertion, and bandits, you lead missions to scavenge food stores, equipment caches, and abandoned installations, to re-establish communication links, contact the government, and hopefully regain control of the country. All the while, the former citizens turned rabid survivors will be assaulting you as you undertake these tasks, desperately trying to find what they can to survive. Essentially everyone is either indifferent or hostile to you. To make matters worse, as the radiation settles in, horrifying creatures begin appearing around the region, mutated monsters, not like what would be seen in the decades after the war, but imperfect abominations that defile the earth they walk, not strong enough to survive natural selection, but horrifying and dangerous enough to catch those inexperienced in wasteland survival off guard. Given that this game will likely take place over multiple months if not years, for reasons I'll get into later, a season system could be implemented. From summer to winter, it would change the environment and probably work as a timekeeping system, because it wouldn't be constant action 24/7. The military would only send you out a few times a month, and the problems requiring your level of skill, whether internal or external, wouldn't appear much more either. That being said, however, as time progresses, things would still continue to get worse on every front, making your job more involved. The bandit groups would still be growing this entire time, leading to ever-increasing attacks against the military, and the resources left over from before the war would continue to dwindle, leading the military to make more supply runs and reach further out. The hardware would break down more often, and the morale would keep going down. By this point, the final decision for the game could be made. With the military bleeding personnel and resources, and command seemingly completely gone, they have no other option than to pull out of DC completely. So you have to decide. Stand by your convictions and aid the military in taking what they can, sabotaging what they can't, and getting the hell out of Dodge, or embrace the wasteland and help the survivors take what they can from the military before they evacuate. Either way, it lines up as a prequel of sorts to Fallout 3 and 76. If you watched my Fixing Power Armor video, I explained the reasons for there being only the surplus T-45 power arm in DC, that being thanks to Colonel Santiago's military remnant. As explained in 76, Colonel Santiago was stationed in DC when the bombs fell, and by the end of 2081, she had led the soldiers under her command to the White Spring Bunker in West Virginia. It's my belief that Colonel Santiago would have been the last remaining military command in DC, and after the failure of the military to contain the situation, which we see the remnants of in Fallout 3, Santiago led the remaining military forces to West Virginia. Of course, the point of exploring this time period isn't to tell this specific story, but given the way it works with it anyway, it's just a nice bonus to tie them together. But it's perfectly understandable that it wouldn't follow that story, given how almost no one actually knows about it. This is just an idea for what it could be like. So now I'll go over some things that could change from what I've outlined. The way I see this concept playing out, as I explained before, is a linear story with basic branches set in DC from the perspective of a soldier. This obviously doesn't have to be the way it's depicted, though I do think it would be the best choice. Given it's a Fallout game, many people may expect that this concept would be applied to an open world packed full of different paths and choices, where you fill the shoes of a nobody who acts merely as a vessel for the player to create or destroy the world they want. It's entirely possible for this to be an option. You could still have the player explore the quickly dissolving society of the immediate post-war America, going around helping or hindering anyone you encounter, choosing between many of the factions cropping up in the constantly worsening state of the country. Like most previous Fallout games, the emphasis would be on freedom for the player. When you scavenge food or other resources, do you give it to the military in hopes they can best distribute it? Do you give it to survivors to help them in case the military can't? Do you keep it for yourself? Or maybe, do you use it to build a following and create a gang out of it? There's also the setting. Like I said, it doesn't have to be DC. It could easily be somewhere we haven't been before, like Seattle or New York, or somewhere that might be more lightly bombed, allowing for some amount of stability rather than constant dissolution of all structure. This could by all means work, and I'm sure many people, including myself, would like to see this, but this isn't what I mean when I talk about a Fallout Final Days. With what I've discussed there, the setting of immediately after the war seems a bit wasted. The tone just wouldn't fit right. The open world type wouldn't be able to do justice to the absolute hell on earth that would be the immediate aftermath of a nuclear war. It works so much better as a linear story. I don't think you should be able to take your time and explore around in this time period. There would be no rest in this chaos. The point of setting it during this time is to show the rapid decline of society and the powerlessness of you as you watch everything turn to shit. It should be more like a history lesson than something you actually have real control over. Hell, even the ending doesn't exactly matter, because we know the outcome of Santiago's military remnant and of DC after the war. There's really nothing here but death and destruction. I think the tone actually trumps the story here, because in the end, no matter what you do, everything will turn to dust and you will achieve nothing. If there ever is a Fallout Final Days, its one and only purpose would be to show a world absolutely devoid of hope.